Since the modern world is so full of distractions, it's always pulling us away from ourselves. We're always giving our attention to something other than ourselves. It's disconnecting us from ourselves. So you have to give yourself the necessary attention that you actually need. And this is not a narcissistic self-absorption. This is just about being well. Your psychological emotional system needs awareness so that it can properly process and be able to just connect to the present. Your psychological emotional system needs awareness so that the energies inside of it can flow and move freely, the free flow of sensation and emotion. And without awareness, it starts to get stuck and stagnant and heavy and solid. And it becomes this sickened state, really. So without really learning to connect to oneself, you live a very disconnected and inauthentic life, because you can't actually express yourself authentically in your career, in your relationship, in any domain of your life whatsoever, without having a connection to yourself. If you're habitually disconnected from yourself, if you're always disassociated from yourself, it's quite literally impossible to do that, because authenticity requires a true connection to oneself so that you can express yourself in an honest way. Another core point is that you're not actually able to follow your deepest instincts. See, we're all kind of being called to things, in a sense. There's an intrinsic guidance system. Intuition is a part of it. Intrinsic motivation is a part of it. There's all these complex systems happening. Your instincts are a part of it, and I'll just leave it at your deepest instinct. A lot of that I'll just leave it under that definition for simplicity's sake. Right, you won't be able to actually listen to it because you're so disconnected from yourself. You're always giving your attention and energy away to anything really that grabs your attention. So you can't really tune into what your heart and your soul wants. You can't really live the life that is aligned with you because you're just scattered all over the place. Your attention is just going to this and to that, and your energy is going to this and to that. And there's just a lack of inquiry into yourself. There's a lack of an ability to connect to yourself. And I have this point right here, written on my phone, and I really like this one. Essentially, you don't trust yourself. That's really what this is when you are not able to act in alignment with your deepest instincts. It's like you have this impulse inside of you that's telling you, it's guiding you very clearly. Right? Especially if you're a less repressed person, you can very easily detect this. And then it's like you turn away from it. Habitually, you close yourself down because you fear that it's not going to get you the things that you need to survive. It's not going to get you the money, it's not going to get you the status, the approval, the love, the validation. You just don't trust your instincts to guide you. Instead, you rely upon the cultural conditioning that you received in the first 18 years of your life. And a lot of that stuff just kind of stays in place and then just repeats itself until a person dies, unfortunately. So it's like you don't trust your own inner guidance system. When it arises, when the impulses arise, it's like there's this repression of it, this avoidance of it, this discomfort, rather than this ability to just like recognize it and then like freely act on it. Kind of like how when you were a kid, you know, when you were a child and there was, you know, you felt some curiosity towards what's happening over there on the playground, and you didn't need a reason to go investigate. You didn't have to rationalize it. It was like you just went and you did it. It's the same thing here. It's like you can clearly discern what your core instincts are, right? It's like a clear discernment. It's not hazy or foggy. It's very clear. And you can act on them. You can sense what's aligned with you. You can sense what's going to drain your energy and what isn't. So I want you to really think about when you were young, right? How there was this lack of like repression that was going on. Your mind didn't need to judge everything. Your mind didn't have to figure everything out and put it into this conceptual box. It was this spontaneity, this aliveness, this openness. It's like we're reconnecting to that while integrating all of the lessons we've learned of just existing as adults in the world. We're integrating the mind. We're integrating logic. We're integrating reasoning while moving beyond it. So our psychological development goes from pre-rational to rational to post-rational or trans-rational. So we're not limiting ourselves to any particular thing. It's like this full spectrum integration. And I want you to keep in mind that when you were a young kid, you didn't like shame yourself for following your impulses. You didn't shame yourself for following your instincts, really. I want to use that word, your deepest instinct, rather than impulse. Because I don't want people to confuse it with like poor impulse control versus like what I'm saying. That's not what I'm saying. It's funny, to get to what I'm talking about, you actually need a pretty strong impulse control. And typically when we think of impulse control, we actually think of repression. That's like how our culture typically defines it. It's really not that. True impulse control is really allowing the impulse and the feeling of the impulse and the feeling of the desire to fully arise in this totally non-repressed way, and then seeing it fully, feeling it fully, and then allowing it to pass. The repression actually just allows the energy to like manifest in strange ways that cause psychological, emotional illness. So keep in mind that when you were young, you weren't like shaming yourself. You didn't feel guilty about following your intrinsic motivation. It was just like this obvious thing. It was so obvious you didn't even need a reason to do it. It was just self-evident. Like, why wouldn't I follow this beautiful sense of curiosity that I have, or this sense of excitement that I have? Another core point is that you actually have the wisdom to follow your own intrinsic motivation and your own sort of inner guidance, but you also have conditioning that prevents you from doing so. That's like the almost, I don't know if I'm using the phrase correctly, that's kind of the catch-22 of this. It's like you have the inner guidance, you have the wisdom to do it, you did it already, you've done it multiple times in your life, but there's so much conditioning that prevents you from acting on it in certain areas that it creates this mess, creates this confusion. So by attuning to yourself, right, learning to not always give your attention to everything in the outside world, dedicating attention and time just for yourself, you reconnect to those natural impulses. They allow, or basically, you allow them to arise again. Because when you're too distracted by the outside world, it's like there's too much stimulation. You're not sharp, you're not lucid, you're not able to attune to yourself well. You're overstimulated. It's like it's just not a healthy feeling. It doesn't put you into a healthy state of being. It's just one of disconnection. And essentially, you're even afraid of your own very natural and deepest instincts. In fact, you've been rejected when you've expressed them when you were very young. You've been ridiculed for them. Sometimes you've been told that they're bad. You've been shamed for them by other people, and you pick up all these self-reflections from other people, parents and teachers, authority figures for the most part. Because when you're very young, you cannot reflect for yourself. The reflections of the people around you and your culture become your own reflections, and they build a big sense of your identity, of your ego. So a core part of really beginning to connect yourself again is bringing awareness into yourself. This ability to observe without judgment and to sustain attention on yourself without judgment, without needing to rationalize, just seeing and feeling, allowing your body to really untense, right? Because our bodies remain in this very tense sort of state. It's this constantly repressing state. Kind of like how if you had your hand out like this, right? I've used this analogy in one of my previous videos. If you have your hand out like this all the time, right? And I'm saying, hey man, you don't have to like squeeze your hand like that. It's very uncomfortable actually. You can like just like return it to its natural open state. It's the same thing with the body. It doesn't have to always be so tense. So disconnecting from the world and connecting to yourself doesn't mean like living as like a hermit forever. That's actually not what I'm saying. It's super counterintuitive, because when you learn to basically unplug from the world and plug into yourself, your ability to come back and embrace the world actually increases. Your ability to have meaningful connections or be effective in your career, this all increases. So this is not avoidance of the world. This is facing yourself directly. In fact, a lot of the reasons as to why we engage with the world so much is to avoid ourselves. We do a lot of things to avoid our being, to avoid our existence. Being just means existence. We do things to avoid our existence. So you need time to simply reconnect and give yourself your attention, and those organic impulses will arise again. So this means sitting in silence with no distraction, just being with yourself and learning to actually fall in love with your own presence. Right? This means not really letting your mind tell you what to do as well, that I need to go and do these things. These are my goals. I have to do X, Y, and Z or else I'm lazy. Right? You don't have to basically run from yourself and then rationalize it as like, oh, I need to be doing this and have these goals or else like I'm bad. It's laziness or something like that. Okay, so there's nothing wrong with even having goals. It's not what I'm saying here. It's just that your mind will rationalize these like escapist plans. And a lot of these things aren't very genuine and authentic to you. A lot of this is like psychological, emotional, in a sense, illness that has kind of been programmed into you from culture. It's like this repressing and avoiding mechanism that has created a lot of illness inside of us as a species, especially in the Western world. And we've picked it up from culture. Our culture is built on escaping. Our culture is built on avoidance. This is just very noticeable for anyone who's emotionally intelligent. I've talked about that in the past already. I'm not going to go into that here. So a lot of the goals that you have, for example, are ways that you actually avoid and escape yourself. They're ways that you actually cut off from your own emotional experience. A lot of the goals that people have aren't even authentic to them. They're just goals that they picked up from culture. I need to have $1 million and fame, and I got to be extremely jacked. And there's nothing wrong with money or fame or being jacked. It's all fine. It's just that your goals need to resonate and align with your own core values, with your own intrinsic motivation, with your own inner guidance system. And when they're out of alignment with that, there's actually going to be a sense of inauthenticity in your life, a sense of like you're not really following your actual path. It's just going to be there. So a lot of our goals are extrinsically motivated rather than intrinsically motivated. Extrinsically motivated meaning just for status, fame, money, sex, approval, validation, etc. Intrinsic motivation coming from our own curiosity, our own sense of connection to ourselves, our own sense of creativity, our own sense of purpose, mastery, freedom, excitement. So I want to really emphasize this final point, that this path requires a lot of honesty, a lot of sincerity. It requires a lot of presence. It requires a questioning of yourself, not a doubting of yourself, a questioning of yourself, an unraveling of yourself, really. And without this, what I'm saying in this video isn't really going to happen. Right? It's not realistic that without being like so fucking honest, it's not going to happen. Because the mind is this very self-deceptive and sneaky system. It can deny reality infinitely. The mind has infinite capacity to deny existence. And this is what we're doing this nonstop. If our minds stopped denying existence and this mechanism shattered, we'd all be enlightened. So it takes time to actually develop this connection with yourself and allow your natural instincts to emerge and guide you. It's a long-term development. Like I said, it requires honesty, presence, and a questioning of your goals. It takes long-term development. It takes a process that will take time. And if you actually commit yourself to it, yeah, you'll notice changes. And there's just you really need to be sincere. It's a very sincere honesty, because sometimes the truth about something stings, it hurts. Sometimes it's great, sometimes it's not. It's hard to say to yourself, I'm extremely repressed. I have a lot of repressed energy in my gut. It's hard to just come to terms with that and like state it, just in that super clear way where you can't avoid it. No more denying it, no more avoiding it. This is what it is. This is what I'm observing right now. I'm not observing something and then rationalizing some story to pull myself away from it. It's just, this is what I'm observing. I can't sit in a room with myself because I'm so anxious and afraid, and I'm so restless. I'm so essentially just kind of neurotic. I can't do it. I'm afraid to sit in a room by myself without distractions. It's hard to just admit that to yourself. It's hard to admit that you're not being authentic. It's hard to admit that you have psychological, emotional dysfunction that needs to be investigated. Because now it's like, oh, fuck, I gotta change. It's like, there's no way out of it now. You've like really just made it so clear and direct to the point where you cannot BS your way out of it. And this path literally needs that. Without truth, without this love and just sincere, open heart for what's true, this isn't going to go anywhere. So that's it for this video. If you guys are interested in working with me, you can apply to do so. Link is somewhere. If you're sincere, I trust that you'll find it. It's not very hard. Take it easy.